I knew something was off the second I walked into my house and the lights didn't come on. Not the porch light, not the kitchen light, nothing. I checked the fuse box. Nothing tripped. Then I checked the fridge. Warm. Microwave? Dead. That's when it hit me, someone had cut my power. Now, I don't live in some back alley neighborhood. This is a nice suburban development in southern Arizona with stucco homes, trimmed hedges, and an HOA that acts more like a dictatorship than a community board. And at the center of it all? Fran Peterson, president of the HOA. Queen of petty complaints and passive-aggressive newsletters. A woman who once fined me $75 because the wheels of my trash bin were visible from the sidewalk. I'm Adrian Brooks. I'm a contractor, own my own business building home extensions and patio covers. I work long days, and when I come home, I expect to enjoy my air conditioning, a hot shower, and a cold beer. Not candlelight like I'm camping in my own house. I pulled out my phone and called the utility company. The guy on the line was polite but firm. Sir, your power was shut off by request of the HOA's maintenance contractor. They reported an electrical hazard and filed an emergency disconnect. I blinked. What? An emergency disconnect. Cited code violations and potential fire risk. You'll need to get an inspection and waiver before we can reconnect. I hung up, boiling with anger. There was no hazard. I knew my house inside and out. I built half of it myself. I replaced the panel last year with a licensed electrician. There were no violations. This was personal, and I knew exactly who was behind it. I marched straight to the HOA office, which because of course sat in a converted model home right at the entrance of the neighborhood. I didn't even knock. I opened the door and stepped inside like I owned the place. Fran looked up from behind her oversized desk. Mid-50s, blonde bob haircut, pearl necklace, and a cardigan like she was running a book club, not terrorizing a neighborhood. Adrian, she said, in that syrupy tone she used when she wanted to sound innocent. What brings you by? You cut my power, Fran. Her eyes widened theatrically. Oh dear. If there's an issue with your electrical system, I'm afraid the HOA must act in the interest of community safety. I laughed once. Don't insult me. You and I both know there's nothing wrong with my system. You filed a fake report? She leaned back in her chair, smug as a cat. Well, if you'd responded to the 3 notices we sent about the unauthorized shed you built. It's not a shed. It's a tool enclosure. And it's under the minimum square footage requiring pre-approval. The board disagreed. You are the board, Fran. And the board voted unanimously, she said, lips curling. I clenched my fists. I had no intention of getting arrested for flipping a desk, so I turned and walked out. She'd gone too far this time. Cutting someone's power, what if I had medication in the fridge? What if I had a pet with heat sensitivity? She didn't care. She wanted to make an example out of me, the guy who never bowed down to her little rules. I'd been a thorn in her side for years, and now she thought she'd finally won. But what Fran didn't know was that I had a few thorns of my own. I spent the rest of the evening collecting receipts, installation permits, the inspection report from when I upgraded the panel, even the video I took last year when I replaced the grounding rod. I had every paper trail imaginable. But that wasn't the big play. The big play came the next morning when I drove to the county records office and requested public access to the HOA's infrastructure permits. You see, HOAs that maintain their own community centers, security lighting, or irrigation systems need proper electrical licenses and service agreements. And guess what? Fran had been cutting costs. The HOA office had its own breaker box, separate from the grid-tied community systems, and it was wired illegally. No permit, no inspection, and no licensed electrician. Just some hired handyman who signed off with a fake license number. I took photos. Printed everything. Next stop, my friend Marcus. He's a journeyman electrician and a certified inspector. I asked him to give the HOA's electrical systems a once-over. He found 4 code violations within 10 minutes, exposed wiring behind the office, an overloaded circuit tied to the irrigation timers, and a junction box that wasn't grounded. I had him document everything. Photos, timestamped reports, the works. But I wasn't done. I called in a complaint to the city's building inspector, then the fire marshal, and then the utility company. I attached every document, every photo. And finally, I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Registrar of Contractors about the fake license number. Still, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. So, I parked across the street from the HOA office the next afternoon. sitting in my truck with the AC running and a cold soda in hand. Right on schedule, a white city utility van pulled up. Then another. Then the fire department. 3 guys in hard hats walked up to the front door and knocked. Fran answered. I could see her expression change from confusion to horror as they started pointing at wiring, panels, and breaker boxes. One of the men held out a bright red tag and slapped it right on the HOA's front meter. And just like that, the lights went out. No more AC. No more security cameras. No more email servers. The HOA office went dark. I rolled down my window and gave a friendly wave. Fran stormed out, red-faced and fuming. She stomped across the street toward my truck. You did this. I leaned out the window. You messed with the wrong contractor, Fran. You had no right. You committed a felony. Unauthorized disconnection of utility services is a crime, and your office is illegally wired. Enjoy explaining that to the fire marshal. She opened her mouth, then saw the fire inspector walking toward her with paperwork in hand. She froze. Ma'am, he said, we're going to need you to vacate the premises. This building is officially condemned until further notice. I've never seen Fran speechless before. It was glorious. I started my engine, gave her a little nod, and drove off. And that was just day 1. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine idling outside my window. I checked the clock. 6:28. I pulled the curtain back and saw a landscaping crew loading equipment off a flatbed trailer right in front of Fran's precious HOA office. Only now, the office was boarded up with a bright orange unsafe structure sticker slapped across the front door. The landscapers looked confused, standing around with leaf blowers in hand and no idea where to plug in their tools. I poured a cup of coffee and stepped outside to watch the show. One of the workers tried the door, found it locked, and started making phone calls. Another guy wandered around to the back, probably looking for a power outlet. Tough luck. That building was deader than a doornail. What really caught my attention, though, was the cluster of folding tables being set up near the community fountain. It looked like Fran was staging an emergency HOA meeting in the open because, well, her throne room was currently uninhabitable. I tossed on a t-shirt and boots, grabbed my binder of documents, and headed over. By the time I got there, a small crowd of residents had gathered. Most of them were neighbors I recognized, some I'd done jobs for, others who usually kept their heads down to avoid trouble. Now they looked curious, a few annoyed. Fran stood at the center of it all, her shoulders squared like she was preparing for battle. Next to her was a guy in khakis and a faded polo shirt, holding a clipboard and trying very hard not to make eye contact with anyone. Fran cleared her throat. Due to an unexpected utility issue, the HOA office is temporarily closed. However, we are proceeding with our scheduled meeting regarding recent violations, architectural approvals, and community safety updates. A hand went up from the back. It was Mrs. Navarro from 3 doors down, the retired schoolteacher who had a rose garden that rivaled a botanical exhibit. Is it true the office was shut down by the fire marshal? She asked. Fran's lips tightened. The office is undergoing an infrastructure review. It's purely procedural. I stepped forward and held up a printed photo of the red tag from the utility company. That's not what the report says. According to the fire marshal's own documentation, the building was condemned for electrical code violations and unsafe wiring. And the contractor who installed it used a fake license number. Fran locked eyes with me, her jaw clenched. The man beside her took a small step to the side, like he didn't want to be in the splash zone. Mr. Brooks, Fran said, this meeting is for residents only. If you have personal grievances, I suggest you submit them through the proper channels. I turned to the crowd. Funny thing about those channels, they were powered by illegal infrastructure. And the person who authorized it? Standing right there with a clipboard and a polo shirt, pretending he's not part of this mess. The clipboard man finally spoke, voice quiet and clipped. Look, I was told the structure was up to code. I'm just the maintenance supervisor, not a licensed electrician. Then why did you sign off on the wiring plans? I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Fran stepped in front of him. We're not going to hold this meeting hostage over technicalities, she said. There are real concerns we need to address in this community. Like property values, unsanctioned structures, and property values? Another voice cut in. This time it was Darren, the guy who ran the local auto body shop and lived on the corner lot with the classic Chevelle in his driveway. You mean like how the HOA just got cited for unsafe conditions? That's not great for home prices, Fran. Fran's face flushed deeper. This is all very dramatic, but I assure you, we're handling the situation responsibly. You shut off someone's power without legal authority, said Mrs. Navarro. That's not responsible, that's dangerous. Fran spun around. That was a necessary action in response to code violations. I raised my hand. I've got the inspection report from last year that proves there were no violations. Signed off by a licensed city inspector. Would anyone like a copy? Several people did. I handed out the duplicates I brought, watching as the crowd read over the paperwork. Murmurs spread. Someone muttered, "She really did it." And another whispered, "There's going to be a lawsuit." Fran tried to redirect. "This meeting is adjourned. We'll reschedule once the office is operational again." "No need," said Darren. "We can have the rest of this meeting right here, in the open, without shady backroom decisions." More heads nodded. I could see the tide turning, and Fran could too. She gathered her papers with trembling hands and stormed off, knocking over a stack of bottled water on her way out. The clipboard guy followed, avoiding everyone's gaze. After they left, people stuck around. They asked questions. Real ones. About where the HOA dues were going, why permit fees had quietly increased last year, and why no one had ever seen a transparent budget breakdown. I offered to help look into it. Over the next few days, the neighborhood transformed. Not physically, but socially. People I'd barely exchanged waves with started coming by. Some brought over documents they'd saved, old newsletters, strange fee notices, even letters that threatened liens over garden hose placement. We compiled everything into a shared drive. I set up a secure online forum where residents could talk freely without fear of Fran's censorship. Then came the discovery that really lit a fire under our feet. One neighbor, a tech-savvy guy named Rafi, dug into the HOA's financial filings. Turns out, the HOA had paid over $25,000 in consulting fees to a company called FJP Community Services, a company registered to a P.O. box owned by none other than Fran Peterson. She was paying herself. We had receipts, bank transfers, tax forms, and the kicker, a copy of the contract she signed as both the HOA president and the consulting representative of FJP Community Services. It was like hiring yourself to babysit your own pet and then charging your spouse. We didn't go straight to the authorities. Not yet. First, we called a special meeting. According to the HOA bylaws, if 30% of homeowners signed a petition, we could call a vote for leadership removal. We got 52% in 2 days. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. Location: the City Library Conference Room. Neutral ground. No Fran-picked venue. No power games. Just documents, residents, and voting slips. When Fran walked in, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they wanted no part of this, she tried to take control. Tried to stop the vote. Claimed the meeting was invalid. But this time, the community wasn't buying it. I stood up, walked to the front, and laid out the timeline. The illegal power shutdown. The fake inspections. The financial fraud. And finally, the misuse of authority to suppress dissent. Then I handed the floor to Rafi, who put the documents on a projector screen and let the evidence do the talking. By the time we finished, the only sound in the room was the quiet rustle of voting slips being filled out. The result? Unanimous. Fran was removed as HOA president. Her 2 loyalists resigned before anyone could even ask them to. A temporary committee was formed from a mix of residents, retirees, parents, business owners, people who actually lived here and gave a damn. As for Fran, she disappeared from the neighborhood within the week. Sold her house and left without so much as a goodbye. Funny how quick the power drains when the plug gets pulled. The Monday after Fran vanished, the neighborhood still felt like it was holding its breath. Empty lawn chairs sat on porches that once had silent watchers. The HOA office remained locked up and boarded, its mailbox overflowing with letters, brochures, and one very soggy community newsletter curled into a sad tube. The power disconnection notice still fluttered in the breeze beside the condemned sticker, but no one had bothered to remove it. No one dared. I figured things would settle down. But if I'd learned anything from dealing with Fran and her little fiefdom, it was that power always tries to crawl back in through the cracks. 3 days after the vote, I got a knock at my door. I opened it to find a woman I'd never seen before. Mid-30s, polished blazer over a cherry red blouse and a tablet in her hand. She looked too corporate to be from the neighborhood. "Mr. Brooks?" she asked. "Depends. Who's asking?" "I'm Dana Keller. I've been contracted by the interim HOA committee to conduct an audit of past board activities. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions." I let her in. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, glancing around like she was cataloging every square foot. "I'd like to start by confirming whether you were the one who submitted the documents that led to the infrastructure inspection." "That's right." "And the financial irregularities involving the consulting company?" "Helped uncover those too." She nodded and tapped the tablet. "Were you ever compensated by the HOA or any third party for your involvement?" I gave her a look. "No. I did it because Fran tried to cut my legs out from under me." I responded. "Understood." She paused. "I've gone through the financials. The full picture's worse than anyone realized. There are missing funds stretching back 6 years. Most of it hidden behind shell vendors and maintenance contracts. None of the previous board members are answering emails. Figures. They probably think if they ignore it long enough, it'll vanish. Problem is, Dana said, some of the payments came from assessments levied improperly. That's money residents technically never owed in the first place. I leaned forward. "So what happens now? Legally? The HOA might have to issue refunds. But practically, the association doesn't have enough in the reserve fund to cover even a third of it. And with the office condemned, we can't even access the physical records without city approval. So we're broke, blind, and technically under investigation." Dana gave a tight nod. "That about sums it up." I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I poured her a glass of water, not because I thought she needed it, but because I needed the moment to think. "So what's your angle?" I asked. "You're not just here for the paperwork." She took the glass carefully. "I have a background in municipal compliance. I've worked with neighborhoods that went through board overhauls. Usually after fraud or mismanagement. I volunteered to help your temporary committee stabilize things." Volunteered. Pro bono. At least for now. My gut told me she was legit. She didn't flinch when I asked questions, and she didn't fish for praise. But I also knew anyone who stepped into the mess Fran left behind had to have an agenda. Even if it was just building a professional reputation. "All right," I said. "What do you need from me?" She tapped the tablet again. "Names. Anyone who might have been complicit but kept quiet. Anyone who benefited from the HOAs. Generosity." I handed her a list. Not guesses, not rumors. Just names I'd come across while helping neighbors check their records. People who'd gotten landscaping contracts without bids. Others who mysteriously had their fines waived or their patio expansions approved under the table. As Dana left, she turned at the door. "If you're willing, I'd like to nominate you for a permanent position on the new board." I laughed. "No chance. You've already done half the job. Might as well get the title. I like being the guy who fixes things. Not the guy who sits in meetings." She smiled faintly and walked off. But something had changed in the neighborhood since Fran's downfall. People didn't just wave anymore, they stopped to talk. Share stories. Ask questions. It was like the whole place had woken up from a long sleep. That weekend, I got a visit from someone I hadn't expected to see again. Gregory Langston. Lived on the southeast corner of the development near the retention basin. Former board member. Quiet guy, drove a Range Rover, always wore golf shirts like he was heading to a club no one else was invited to. He stood on my porch with a manila envelope under one arm. "I need to talk," he said. I crossed my arms. "You resigned before the vote. What do you want now?" I didn't know everything about what Fran was doing. He hesitated. But I knew enough to feel guilty. Guilty's a start. "You planning to do anything about it?" He held out the envelope. "These are copies of the contracts she used. I kept them because I thought if it ever came down to it, I might need leverage." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "Why now?" "Because when I saw her leave, I realized she never cared about any of us. She just used the HOA to build her little empire. And I helped her, even if I didn't mean to." I opened the envelope. Inside were contracts, emails, even a scanned letter signed by Fran authorizing the use of HOA funds for a personal retreat to Sedona. Hotel receipts included. "This is enough to bury her," I said. "I don't want to bury her. I want to help fix what we broke." I stared at him a long time. Then I handed him a pen and a notepad. "Write a statement. One that says exactly what you knew when you knew it and what you did about it." He nodded and sat on the porch bench, writing slowly, deliberately. Later that night, I gave the documents to Dana. She looked through them without speaking. When she finished, she powered off her tablet. "This changes everything. With this, we can file for restitution. Maybe even push for criminal charges. You think the others will flip too? They'll have to. Nobody wants to be the last one holding the matchbook." Meanwhile, the neighborhood kept evolving. The condemned HOA office was eventually torn down. In its place, the interim board decided to build a small open-air pavilion, something everyone could use. No locked doors, no surveillance cameras, just a place to gather. We held a community barbecue there the day after construction wrapped. It wasn't fancy folding tables, coolers full of soda, a few paper lanterns strung between poles. But people showed up. Families I'd never met brought baked casseroles and lemon bars. Kids ran barefoot on the new grass. Nobody talked about fines or violations. They talked about plans, community gardens, a tool library, maybe even a mural along the wall that backed up to the main road. For the first time in years, it felt like a neighborhood again. At one point, Dana sat beside me near the grill. "You know," she said, "most places I work with, they fall back into the same habits. People get comfortable again. Stop paying attention." I nodded. "That won't happen here." "What makes you so sure?" "Because Fran taught us what happens when we don't look up. And now everyone's watching." She raised her soda. "To vigilance." I raised mine. "To community." And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows over fresh-cut grass, I realized something. Fran didn't just lose her little empire. She accidentally gave us something better. 3 weeks after Fran disappeared, the HOA was operating out of borrowed space in the back room of the local community church. It was temporary, barely functional, but people actually showed up now. No one was forced. There were no threats of fines, no veiled warnings buried in newsletters. Just neighbors talking loudly, clumsily, imperfectly but talking. Still, the storm Fran stirred hadn't passed. Not completely. One evening, I got a call from Marcus, the electrician who'd helped me document the violations at the old HOA office. I hadn't heard from him since the fire marshal shut the place down. "You might want to take a look at something," he said. I met him in a narrow alley behind the tennis courts. He pointed to a metal housing unit mounted on a concrete slab with a fresh padlock, too new and shiny to match the rest of the surroundings. "That's a sub-panel that feeds power to the irrigation systems," Marcus said. "Used to be tied to a shared breaker, but someone ran a new line into it." I crouched beside the conduit. The conduit pipe was clean, no sun bleaching, no spiderwebs, no dust. The ground around it was disturbed, not professionally trenched. Someone had done it fast, probably at night. I stood up. "Who signed off on it?" "No permit. No inspection." I only noticed it because the load readings from the church system didn't match what should have been running. Someone's quietly stealing power. We followed the line. It snaked around the edge of the park, beneath a fence, and into a locked utility closet behind the community's gym facility. The gym had been closed for years, water damage, mold, and a roof that leaked like a sieve, but the lights were on inside. Marcus pulled out his multimeter and checked the line. Live, drawing steady current. Someone's powering this place again. I didn't need to guess who. Only one person in this neighborhood had the gall to set up an illegal electrical tap after getting publicly evicted from power. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Dana. She responded instantly. 2 words. Already investigating. The next morning, I was at the temporary HOA meeting in the church annex. Dana stood at the front, a stack of folders under one arm. Her expression was different this time, not focused, not composed. Tight, controlled, like someone holding back a tidal wave. She waited until everyone had taken a seat. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to address something critical. Our committee has discovered an unauthorized power connection feeding electricity into a condemned facility. The source is traced to a privately rerouted line, one that bypasses inspections and permits. Whispers broke out. "Who did it?" asked a man near the back. Dana flipped open a folder and held up a blown-up photo of a work order with a barely legible signature at the bottom. The work was filed under a non-existent contractor ID. But the paper trail leads back to a storage unit rented under the HOA's corporate account, 2 weeks after the board was voted out. That got the room buzzing. I stayed quiet. I already knew exactly where this was heading. Dana laid out printed bank records next. Funds used for the rental came from an emergency reserve account, one the previous board never disclosed to the community. It was not included in any of the annual reports. It appears to have been used as a slush fund. "Are you saying Fran's still pulling strings?" someone asked. Dana didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned to the projector and clicked to the next slide, a security still from a motion camera mounted outside the gym. The timestamp was from 4 nights ago. The image showed a figure in a hooded sweatshirt unlocking the back door. But the face wasn't hidden. It was Carl Vickers. Carl had been Fran's unofficial fixer. He never held a title, but he always hovered nearby, setting up chairs before meetings, passing out flyers, whispering in Fran's ear during votes. He was the guy who once posted 26 violation notices in a single night, all handwritten, all unsigned. And now he was caught red-handed. Dana shut off the projector. "We've notified the utility company. They'll be cutting the illegal line this week. We also filed a police report. Theft of service is a felony." People sat in stunned silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the whole room was on their feet, not in celebration but in sheer disbelief that the rot was still spreading. After the meeting, Dana pulled me aside. "I've been digging deeper," she said. "We've uncovered more financial inconsistencies. The emergency reserve fund? It wasn't just for utilities. It paid for a private investigator." I blinked. "A what?" She nodded. Fran hired someone to follow residents who challenged her authority. Mostly those who disputed fines or refused to comply. "You're telling me she spied on her neighbors?" "I'm telling you she paid someone to document their routines, visitors, even license plate numbers. There's a file on you." She reached into her satchel and handed me a folder. Inside were photos: me leaving my house, me talking to neighbors, me hauling lumber into a client's garage. One photo showed me shaking hands with a city inspector. Another had a red circle drawn around my truck's license plate. "This is how far she went," Dana said. "And nobody knew." I took a breath. "What do we do now?" "We hold a community vote," she said. "We decide whether to press charges as a collective. If we move forward, the case will carry the weight of the entire HOA membership. It'll be harder to bury." The vote was held that weekend at the new pavilion. Not in secret. Not behind closed doors. Everything was counted in the open, with volunteers from different blocks verifying the tallies. The result? Unanimous. Charges were filed against Fran, Carl, and 2 former board members who helped reroute funds. The private investigator was also named. Turns out he was a cousin of one of the board loyalists and had no license to operate. Fraud. Trespassing. Wiretapping. The list grew longer by the day. The neighborhood changed after that. Not all at once. Some folks still kept to themselves. Others carried a wariness that would take time to fade. But little things started happening. The community garden broke ground. A group of teenagers painted a mural on the back wall of the old gym, turning it into a public art space. An elderly couple who'd never attended a single meeting before signed up to host a weekend potluck. People took ownership. The HOA was no longer some shadowy force hiding behind fine print and fake rules. It was just us. Regular folks trying to live in peace without power trips or politics. As for me, I turned down the board seat again. But I agreed to lead a new committee, one focused on transparency. We kept everything public. Budgets, meeting minutes, even maintenance schedules. I set up a website and taught people how to check permits, dispute citations, and track their dues. One afternoon, I was hauling supplies for a neighbor's porch repair when I saw a kid on a scooter stop at the corner and stare at the mural. He pointed at one of the figures, an outline of a woman in a cardigan, her shadow stretching like a storm cloud across a row of houses. Over her, in bright blue paint, were the words, "Power belongs to the people, not the petty." The boy turned, saw me watching, and gave a thumbs up before scooting off. I laughed and kept walking. Fran tried to build an empire on fear, fines, and silence. But she forgot the most important rule of any neighborhood. Eventually people talk, and when they do, no amount of power, real or fake, can stop the truth from flipping the lights back on.